Today, I want to introduce the Tokenomics Design Canvas. The Tokenomics Design Canvas, TDC, was developed with input from several different projects working on different chains. It's used by incubators and accelerator programs, and it really helps builders identify the key mechanisms they want to include in their tokenomics designs. Oftentimes, tokenomics designs, I would notice teams not think through the higher level details, think through what needs to be included, what needs to be prioritized, what questions remain unanswered, and in theory and concept, strike a balance, but in practice, maybe need to be modeled more. And this really helps teams get a lot of clarity and focus in their tokenomics design. You can get help, examples, digital copies, a Google Sheets version that you can fill out more easily at linktree/tokenomics. And I think the easiest way to go through this is, rather than read through the instructions, is to show you an example. So the first piece you're going to complete is the token objectives page. This has 4 seemingly simple questions, though a lot of times builders, even if they've sort of answered these questions in their head, they haven't thought through them in great detail and keep them top of mind when they're designing their tokenomics, and so they kind of get lost. And so the first of these questions, super important, is why do people use your product, right? Not your token, but your product. Why do people use Curve, Uniswap, Binance, NFTs, Ape Club, whatever it is? Why do people use your product before you worry about a token? 2, what is your token used for? You want to be specific about what it is used for and what it is not used for. Isn't it both governance and utility? Is it only utility? What utility, right? What utility is it not for? Is it a tokenized asset, right? Is it meant to track or represent some on-chain or off-chain value? How does your token improve your product? So Uniswap, for example, had a product more than a year before their token launched. So once they launched the token, how does that improve the product? Well, in their case, it made their liquidity pools a lot deeper, meaning that all these users, all these traders had a better experience of trading on Uniswap. So it improved the product. But that's only one piece of the puzzle. Brings us to question 4. Why does your token have value to holders? The best tokenomics are win-win-win situations, right? It improves the product and it improves a value for holders. So this could be utility to holders, or this could be, the token is burned, there's some burn mechanism or it's a value accrual, but you can't just strike one at the expense of the other. The best tokenomics designs improve your product and have value for token holders. So with these objectives answered, we want to keep these in mind, and it really helps us focus on completing the next step, which is the token mechanisms worksheet. This might look like a lot, but we'll go through a simple example that will break it down and make it very simple to understand. Very briefly, we have different columns here. Main column, the first column we're concerned about is agents. So each different economic agent in your tokenomics ecosystem, we're gonna complete a row for that agent. So there's going to be different rows that we complete for different agents. We're going to complete columns A through G first for every row, and then only after completing every row, go and complete column H, and then complete column I last. And so let's look at an example. I put together a simple DAO governance token example. I'm going to zoom in a bunch here so I can make sure people can read this. And here we have, in this simple example, 2 agents. We have DAO members, and we have bad actors, saboteurs, people being malicious. You always want to include agents that you wouldn't necessarily like to be using your token, but could and will realistically be using your token. Why? Because you obviously don't only want to design for what you hope for. You want to design for what's realistically going to happen. There's always going to be someone out there looking to take advantage, and you need to design for that. If we look at the first row, remember, we're going to complete the first row by row, for columns A through G first. And so DAO members, what desired behavior do we want them to do? Well, we want them to vote. We want them to be highly engaged in voting. Why do they not do that currently? What are the frictions to that? Well, it's time consuming, right? They have to look for a vote. They have to be aware that the vote's happening. They have to go and manually vote. They have to maybe claim their tokens back after the vote has finished, etc. In this simple example, the undesired behavior here is kind of direct inverse of the desired. That's not always going to be the case. This is a relatively simple example. But these DAO members, what's their undesired behavior? Well, abstain from voting. And what are the motivations for undesired behaviors? Again, the simple example, somewhat the inverse, not always the case. But their motivation for their undesired behavior is to save time. And so we can think about what incentive mechanisms and what disincentive mechanisms can we include in the tokenomics to encourage the desired behavior and discourage the undesired behavior. And in this case, we're just thinking through this, we're brainstorming, right? It's not important to be perfect. It's important to just get concepts on the paper. And so we could think about rewarding voting engagement, right? Haven't thought through exactly how that works or looks like, but we don't need to do that yet. We could reward voting engagement. In terms of disincentives, we could also consider punishing a lack of voting engagement. Now, you might think this doesn't make any sense, or your warning flags might going up. That's fine. Remember, we're just brainstorming right now. This doesn't mean that we're going to necessarily think this is a good idea or include it in our tokenomics. But we're throwing it out there because it's possible we could punish a lack of voting engagement. Okay, so we've completed columns A through G for the first row. Now we're moving down to the next row, bad actors. We actually want this group of this agent to be abstaining from voting. We don't want them voting. And there's not really any frictions to abstaining from voting. What we don't want them to do is vote and try and sabotage the protocol, right? We don't want them proposing bad votes or voting on bad proposals that are maybe trying to accrue them an unfair advantage or a bunch of economic resources or take over the DAO or just sabotage it because they're trolling. We don't want them to be voting and proposing votes. And their motivations for doing so are most likely, profit, maybe some trolling, but overall profit. Now, there's nothing really to incentivize because there's not much frictions to their desired behavior. But in terms of disincentives, what we could do is punish bad voting. And we could also have minimum size required to propose a vote so that there's some threshold. People have some economic stake because they're a large player in the DAO in order to propose a vote. Circling back to bad voting, though, you're probably wondering, what do I mean by bad voting? And well, think about a proposal that is legitimately debated, right? Some people think it's good. Some people think it's bad. It's got counter arguments that could mean it's good or could mean it's bad. There's a reasonable argument to support either. What would you expect that vote to look like at the end, the results? Well, it's probably going to look something closer to a 50-50 vote. Could be 60-40, could be 70-30, right? Could be something in that ballpark, maybe even 75-25. But now think about a vote that's obviously good or obviously bad for the protocol, right? Anyone voting against it or for it, depending if it's good or bad, would be trying to sabotage the protocol. If it's obviously good, anyone voting against it is obviously trying to sabotage, right? If it's obviously bad, anyone voting for it is obviously trying to just accrue wealth to themselves. A vote like that is going to be a lot more imbalanced. It's going to be more like 100% to 0%, right? Or 90% to 10%. And so I'm calling that 10% bad voting because it's much more obviously non-good-willed voting. And so now we've completed columns A through G for each row. Now it's time to complete column H. And this is where we look at, row by row, the incentive and disincentive mechanisms and think about, do they contradict, do they conflict with the behaviors we want to reward or other incentive mechanisms that we've designed, right? And so here, rewarding voting, because we said we would reward voting engagement, just flat out rewarding voting engagement would also encourage bad actors to vote, right? So maybe we don't want to necessarily do that. And conversely, punishing a lack of engagement would encourage, low quality engagement, right? If we punish a lack of engagement, we're actually going to be making a lot more of these guys just engage for the sake of engaging. And that's something we don't want to do. So we probably don't want to include this at all in our tokenomics, right? And you might say that's obvious. And yes, in this simple example, that is relatively obvious. But unless we sat there and laid this out and highlighted it, we might have missed it, especially in a more complex example. or in a complex case. And then moving on down to the next row, so punish bad voting, right? Well, we don't want to discourage non-malicious token holders from voting, right? If we punish bad voting, you might say, well, I'll just wait and see, right? I don't want to risk voting for something that I truly believe in, with good intentions, but it only ends up getting 10, 20% of the vote and I get punished, right? So I'll just wait and see. So that ends up countering, right, conflicting with what we want, which is to reward and promote more voting engagement. And so now it's time to complete column I. And we're going to lay out possible solutions, possible balances, possible ways to reconcile all these so that we can get all the desired behavior we want and cut out all the undesired behavior we don't want. And so one way we could do that, I'm going to start down here, is to slash losing voters, right? So if you vote on the minority side, you get slashed. And the slash of the vote scales with the degree of the loss of vote, right? So if the vote is 90 to 10 and you're in the 10, you get slashed more than if the vote is 60 to 40 and you're in the 40. In fact, maybe you don't get slashed at all if the vote is as balanced as 60 to 40. Maybe the slash only kicks in when the vote is at least as imbalanced as 80-20, right? Or more imbalanced. The point is not to pick the exact numbers here in the TDC, but you can see how the Canvas has helped us show us what questions do we need to answer, what questions do we need to model, what factors do we need to make sure we're getting right in order to balance the overall mechanisms and incentives in the tokenomics. And so we have an open question, right, of how much losing voters should be slashed and when exactly those slashes should kick in and how they should scale. But we know roughly that it does make sense that they should scale with the degree of the loss of the vote. Conversely, if we pay a portion of those slashed votes to winning voters, then we're going to get more voters encouraged to, rewarding people to vote, which is what we wanted. And we can pay earlier voters a higher portion, right? So if I'm the very first person to vote, I can get a higher portion of the rewards, which counters that wait and see approach that is introduced because there's some slashing to the losing side. And so where exactly is that balance, right? What percentage should we pay early voters? Well, we need to model that. We need to talk to users. We need to draw out some quantitative modeling. But without completing the canvas, we would never have identified that that's a factor that we need to balance even in the first place. And so hopefully this simple example has shown you, how to complete the tokenomics design canvas, but also the value in doing so. Here is a much more in-depth example that I've purposely left incomplete so that you can take a stab at doing it, which is based on Curve, the CRV token. It's got 5 different agents: liquidity providers, traders, CRV token holders, protocols and DAOs, and yield mercenaries. And I've already filled out all the desired behaviors, frictions, undesired behaviors, motivations, incentive mechanisms, and disincentive mechanisms. Feel free to update these or add your own. I basically added for the most part, what Curve currently has. And you can think through, what are the conflicts that arise in Curve's tokenomics, and what are possible resolutions that the protocol might consider to improve. If you're struggling through it, you can get in touch with me at Matty Stacks on Twitter, or you can get more resources and get in touch with me at linktree/tokenomics. And don't forget to like and subscribe this YouTube channel, because I'll be releasing more content to help builders with tokenomics. And thanks for watching. And I hope this has been as valuable to you as the canvas already has been to many of the builders that I've worked with. Have a good day.